Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years in the classroom. And today's topic is going to be a great one. And I feel like I say that at the beginning of every single episode, that this topic is going to be a great one. But this is one that I have truly had a passion for talking about with pre-service educators for a while. And that is grading practices. So what do we do in our classroom that is centered around our grading philosophy, and how do we give grades to the students in our room? And I have a guest in the studio with us today, a former colleague of mine. Her name is Christine Rittenhouse, who's an AP physics teacher at Liberty High School in Frisco ISD. So, Christine, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
I miss you every day.
You know, I miss you too, and I miss the classroom. I do certainly miss the physics that I got to teach back then. But I enjoy what I'm doing now, and I especially enjoy this podcast. So thank you for being on it. So I'm going to throw it back to you, though. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a background of who you are, where you come from, and how'd you get into education?
Well, let's go backwards. So I've been teaching here at Liberty for, I think this is my 13th year, right? And so I've been teaching AP physics for most of that, but I've picked up like a few sections of like on-level physics. And then going backwards, I have a Master of Arts in Teaching Science from the University of Texas at Dallas, which is where I think we actually first met.
We did, yeah.
But before that, I was a bona fide like physics major. And the reason why I was a bona fide physics major is because I really like love physics. I find a lot of joy in seeing like the patterns and like the universe and like just seeing like all of these things in nature that are like consistent. And I just get so excited to like see these like patterns that are like predictable and repeatable. And I wanted to share my excitement with like the next generation, because it's just so rewarding to, you know, be sitting and like struggling with something for a while, and then it just like, oh my gosh, it works and it's beautiful. So I just want to encourage the kids to like, you know, explore and like nourish their curiosity and investigate.
It's awesome that you brought that up, because that was literally going to be my follow question, was going to be like, what do you like most about being in the classroom? And I feel like many of our secondary teachers that I've talked to and that I've had the opportunity to have on this podcast is really just about that. It's, you love the content so much that you want to see other people love it too. And that's why we get into education.
Yes, this is absolutely true. Physics is the best. It's far better than biology and chemistry. Full offense intended. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get some emails on this one. So you may know, obviously, those who've listened to the podcast know that I was a high school physics. It was in the intro. I was a high school physics teacher. And so you may thinking that I'm playing favorites by asking Christine to be here on this podcast. But
I mean, I am your favorite, though.
That is true. You were one of my favorite colleagues that I ever taught with. But the idea of having Christine here is that we worked together in Frisco many moons ago at this point to really tackle the idea of grading in our classrooms. And it was kind of not just us, it was a group of us that really looked at grading within the campus and eventually within the district, and looked for ways that we could make it better. So I'm going to pose a question to you, and maybe we can both give this question, but one to open the doorway for our story here, and that is, why do we give students grades? Your thoughts?
So grading should let us figure out what students know and like what they know how to do. A lot of times, like, it's very focused on like, oh, so the teachers know what the students know, and then they like give them a grade. But I think that grades really should be informative for the students as well, right? Like, students are in school so that they can like master like knowledge and skills. And grades should be given, you know, like frequently, like formatively, so that like students can track their progress and like see their growth. I think it's you know, really rewarding to say, you know, wow, I was like really bad at this like 3 weeks ago, but like now I'm a champ at this. I can tackle problems. They're like weird and out of the box and like totally novel. Like, you would never see this in the real world, but like I can do this,
Right.
right?
So I feel like this is really different from when, I don't know, whenever I was younger, like whenever I was in elementary school, middle school, we get the progress reports, we get the report cards, right? I take them home, I show them to my parents, but I didn't care what was on there, right? I mean, so what you're talking about is really giving the student the opportunity to monitor their own learning, monitor their own progress, and give them sort of ownership of what's happening in the classroom.
Yes, absolutely. Like the ownership part, like maybe some kids like will never really care, right? And they're just in it for whatever. But I find that a lot of kids actually like do want to do well and they do want to like improve themselves. And by giving kind of like this kind of frequent, kind of like low stakes feedback, and like providing them like different ways to like build their skills and like offer
Mhm.
them like extra practices and stuff, like they get to decide, it's kind of like seeing the consequences of what you do. Like, are
Sure.
you going to study and like see an improvement, or are you going to sleep and like not see an improvement? That's on them now, right? I mean,
It
we
is.
as teachers are obviously going to encourage them to do that, but like ultimately, they are the ones that are responsible for their own learning. And giving them these like kind of frequent like checkpoints of like, hey, here's how you're doing, here's how you should be doing if you want this, this like final score at the end of the day.
Right. So, I mean, let's talk about that. What is it that we take for a grade? So you're talking checkpoints, you're talking tests, you're talking. What is it that you actually take for a grade in your classroom?
So our grade structure in physics right now, we've simplified it a lot. Our first assessment is like purely formative. It's like an AP style free response question. And they essentially like grade them themselves, right? And they just like kind of self-report their score. It is actually totally unweighted.
Mhm.
But it's kind of like a, kind of see like how you did. If you like really did not do well, like make notes of like what specifically did you have trouble with.
Mhm.
Our next assessment is like a different style. It's like kind of like a multiple choice or like a computational, something that is quick for me to grade, so that I can give them that feedback like much more quickly. So this second assessment, technically it's still like a formative assessment, because they will have like a third and final assessment that is like a more traditional like test structure. They will have
Mhm.
like some multiple choice, they will have like some number crunching stuff, and they will have like a free response where they actually have to like write and like explain um, their thinking. And
And that's
so,
similar to like the AP test, right? I mean, they're going to have to do multiple
yes.
choice. They're going to have to do free response questions, and we'll circle back around to the AP test, I think, towards the end of the episode. But it's good that you're assessing them in multiple different ways, right?
Yes, and like really the more that you see like the same style of like any kind of course that, has like a big test at the end, like the more familiar you are like with the structure of the exam, the better you'll do, right? Because there's no
Sure.
gonna not gonna be any surprises. In terms of like what actually gets like recorded in the grade book, all of the unweighted stuff gets recorded just for like everyone's, information. Like the kids can see it, the parents can see it, I can see it. Right? I can call students in to tutorials if like they're still struggling after like their second one, right?
Right.
In between their second assessment and their third and final assessment, I'll say, hey, let's come into tutorials, let's like work some practice problems, let's make sure that like you're where you want to be, before our summative test. And so we consider like the most recent assessment more heavily than any of the previous ones. Like, I want to see student growth, right? And I want to reward student growth. Like, if someone's, getting perfect scores like on assessment one, assessment two, assessment three, okay, that's great, right? But
Mhm.
what I'm like most proud of as a teacher is when someone is like terrible on the first assessment, kind of like mediocre on the second assessment, but by the time the third assessment comes out, like if they can show that they've mastered the material, like this is where I am most effective as a teacher.
Yeah, so I think that sort of structure really lends itself well to the idea of crediting a student of where their current understanding is, right? Not penalizing them for when they were still learning early in the process, right? That grade is still in the grade book, but we give more weight to what happened in the later end of the learning cycle where they did show mastery of a subject. So that's really really awesome. So you provide multiple assessments, and I say you, but it was us, right? We were kind of on the front end of this, but you've continued on with this. You provide multiple assessments And then what happens at the end? So like you take all three of these, and how do you determine a final grade?
If their score has gone up, up, and up, I give them their most recent score. Like it doesn't matter if you got like 25% on like the quiz, if you manage to get, the appropriate number of points on like the final assessment, then I'm not even going to consider your first or second assessment. Where it gets tricky is when you have a student that does really well on the second assessment, but not so hot on like the final one. Um, there's where you kind of have to make some judgments. So, usually I apply like a standard like kind of like averaging formula. Like if they've been keeping up with their work and like their assignments and like kind of like participating, I will do an average of like the most recent two. Sometimes you need to like have a conversation and figure out like what exactly is going on, right, with that student. If you have a student who's super high achieving and like suddenly, something goes wrong and they have like a surprisingly low score on that third assessment, this is where you have room for maybe like a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah,
Maybe you could do just like kind of a like an informal kind of like a verbal like assessment, like just kind of ask them about the material and see if they, can answer. Because maybe, the student just had like a really off day or something like
right.
that.
Yeah, so you're leaving room, and I really love this. You're leaving room for the teacher to exercise professional judgment in what is happening with their students. So you have assessed all along the way, you provide multiple opportunities, and you're giving the student the benefit of the doubt if they mess up on the one day, one assessment, and you have the opportunity to go talk to them and see where their understanding actually is, and then determine a grade. That's what I love that language. It's determining a grade rather than just simply averaging, all the grades that happened in the 9 weeks and getting a final score. You are the teacher, and you're saying my students have this level of understanding. I can prove it using X, Y, and Z, and
Yeah.
that's the grade that they get.
Yeah, and I think especially, trying to remember this as like an early year teacher, right? Like you are a professional. Like you can use your best judgment. Like you don't have to be like strictly beholden to like what the students necessarily put on paper. Like remember, you have many different ways that you like could assess just beyond like paper assessments, multiple choice assessments. Like remember that you can like talk to the kids, right, as
Right.
well to like see if they understand what's going on. It's like maybe they're just not that confident with like their writing, right? But they
Right.
can like verbalize it, like you let them like talk it through a little bit and they can like articulate what they know, right? Then you can update the score accordingly.
So you're talking about scores. So let's talk about scores, right? I mean, I think we've been intentionally not putting numbers to certain things that we've been talking about here because I think we both know where the conversation's going. But in a traditional grade book, we have to work underneath the 100-point scale, right? I mean, you have a 70, you got an 85, you got a 99. So if we're thinking in that realm, I'm going to throw a hypothetical at you. You got a student who's scoring an 88, and you have a student who's scoring a 91. What's the difference between the two students?
Well, see, the student who scored an 88 just forgot a negative sign, and we've just arbitrarily penalized them for being careless instead of their knowledge. Like, I don't think that 100 tiny little individual like gradations. Like, I don't think that anyone could assign like a true proficiency level, right, to a student to that level of detail,
Right.
right? You have kids who are advanced at physics. You have kids that are like proficient at physics. You have kids who needs work, right, at physics. And like you can predict kids' AP scores like just by, having them in class. Like you kind of know, right? Like where these are. These
Yeah.
these students will end up falling like as you get to know them, as you like see, their growth and like how they work.
It's
But
interesting
like
that you bring up AP scores because I mean AP doesn't do this, right? College Board doesn't give an 89 or a 72. They give a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1, right? I mean, these are only 5 buckets instead of 100, right? It's much easier to place a student in one of those rather than it is to say, oh, you're an 87.
yes, and can I emphasize it is much easier to place a student in a bucket, Right? I mean, obviously there's still going to be like those edge cases, but this is where having that, that wiggle room, like when you have like your second assessment and your third assessment, if the two scores are the same, cool, great, easy, right? If they're within like one bucket of each other, then maybe you can like split the difference, kind of give them a score that's kind of like in between that, right? But having 100 different buckets is like it's not, it doesn't mean
Yeah,
anything at that point. Like,
you'd have to force your every single one of your assessments to have 100 points on there in order to really kind of nail down where they were going to be. There's 100 points, and out of every single assessment, you scored an 88, an 87, and 90, whatever. That's just not doable for a
well,
teacher,
and I'm
right?
not going to grade a 100-point assessment.
Yeah, it's what I'm saying. It's not doable. But going back to the question, right? A person who scores an 88 is making a B, while a person who's scoring a 91 is making an A. So what if I retooled the question and said, okay, what's the difference between an A student and a C student?
Well, I would say that an A student really has like an advanced level of knowledge, of skill. An A student would be able to solve a problem that they've never seen before, right? Something that's kind of like off the wall and kind of wacky. A C student, I think, is going to be able to tackle just like an average problem, like any of the sample problems that we do in class, pretty much situations that are very similar, right? So like what we've practiced on, and they're solving those problems with like a high degree of like reliability, like minor, like little tiny errors, like negative signs or like algebra mistakes, because we teach physics and it's got quite a bit of math. Like,
Yes, it does. Yeah.
yes, right. That doesn't really matter as much to me as far as like can the students like apply the big concepts mostly successfully, like each and every time, like consistently
Mhm.
every time.
Yeah. So you're talking about a C student being able to do the material that you have presented in class, while an A student is able to do that and more. And then a B is going to be somewhere kind of in between. So then, like, what would you consider an F student? What is a student who's failing the class?
Yeah, so like this is going to be a student who like can't verbally explain like what physics principle is like being asked about, right? That's unable to do like any kind of like mathematical like reasoning, like logical like reasoning, that just like has a really like poor understanding of like the patterns and models that we use in physics.
So that this is, I guess, a question leading, and I'm drawing you to the place that I think we know we're both going, which is the buckets that we developed. We were teaching together, and they had specific names. And so I'm thinking, okay, if you were a C or better, right, you were passing the class. That means you knew enough material to be proficient, right? And so that's what we called a C level student, was that they were proficient. And then above that, you had mastered. So a B level student was someone who was able to do all of the things that we asked them to do with pretty good fidelity, and maybe a little bit extra, right? And then the advanced student was able to kind of take almost everything that we were throwing at them, which is interesting to put it that way, almost everything, because we never said that a 100 had to be the A, right? There was no need to get a 100 in order to get that highest level of grade, right?
Yes, and so something that we as like a campus have been talking about lately is like we're trying to like get the other departments to like do this kind of like bucket method as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
it should be like less work overall, but several teachers are very like reluctant to say that like to get 100 you can be anything less than like perfect,
Right.
right? But like that's an arbitrarily high standard. Like you don't have to make a perfect score on an AP exam to earn a 5 in the course. You don't
Right.
have to make a perfect score in a course to earn a 4.0. Like I
True.
mean in college, right? So it just, I feel like it's a lot of stress on the students if they have to get like every single point, right? To earn the highest score. Like our focus should be on, I as a student want to be at a level where I can solve any problem that they throw at me and have like a good understanding of what I'm doing. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I always want to know what I'm doing, and I always want to like get like almost all the way there. And I don't have to like beat myself up over like any missing negative signs, right? Uh, I just remember when I was in high school, like my math class, like every time I dropped a negative sign, it was like -1 points. And it's just like, like,
Yeah,
no, you can see that I know the process,
right.
right? It's just like, I just can't keep track of these little things
Right.
everywhere.
Being able to really identify a student in one of these buckets really comes down to the way that we design the assessments too, right? I mean, because if we're saying that a proficient student is able to get all of the stuff that we presented in class, but none of the really higher level thinking stuff, then we have to design our assessments to have things similar to what we did in class, things that were a little bit of a stretch, things that are really far out left field, and then maybe some of just the really, really easy questions that maybe just rote memorizations, right? So we have to design our assessments to have all of these on there. So this type of grading does put a little bit more on the teacher in terms of, okay, really thinking through what is an assessment. But I think that's good, right? It's good for the student, it's good for the teacher to know where they stand.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're beginning with the end in mind, right? When you're thinking about your assessment, it's just like you said, you want a good mix of questions, like different levels of questions, right? So like what we did, we considered like the depth of knowledge levels. I think there's like four depth of knowledge levels, but we kind of like squished them into like very generally speaking, like easy, medium, and hard, right? Where
Right.
easy is the rote memorization kind of stuff, like the facts, right? The medium questions are, as you said, like the stuff that, oh yeah, we literally did the sample problem in class. Like, can you do it again with like different numbers or like solving for like a different variable? Whereas like the hard questions are really kind of like I haven't seen this before, but by applying like just kind of like the principles, like the laws of physics that we've been learning, I can come up with like the correct conclusion. And so from the distribution of points that we put on our test of easy, medium, and hard points, this is how we classified how many points does it take to earn a proficient? How many points does it take to earn a mastered? The making of the assessment, it is a little bit like front loaded. And sometimes when you like go over like the results and you're like looking at, okay, how many kids got this question right? Okay, I thought this was an easy question, but like only like 10% of people got it right. Like what is going on? Like sometimes you
Right.
could like reclassify, a question as like easy, medium, or hard, but like the bulk of it, right, really should be done before you give that
Right.
assessment.
Yeah, and it really kind of so I love this quote that is from Robert Marzano, but it is teaching is both an art and a science, right? And I feel like this is exemplifying it throughout this entire episode that we've been talking about. It's the art of a teacher, it's the professional nature of a teacher to know where the students are by virtue of being in the classroom with them day in and day out. It's the science of being able to design an assessment to tell you specific bits of information about where their understanding is lacking versus where they clearly are excelling, and that's where these assessments are. And then you give them multiple opportunities to show that understanding, and then you determine a grade by the end of this of like this is where you are. Now going back to the idea of we have to work within a grade book system that is built on the 100-point scale. So if you were an advanced student, what grade would you earn?
Should be 100, right? I mean, you are gonna make a 5 on the AP exam. Sweet. Good job.
Right. And just to reiterate, advanced doesn't mean you had to get everything right. Advanced was just that you got a certain number of points that were easy, medium, and hard, right? And if you were a proficient student, then what would you get?
You're doing okay. I mean, it's gonna be like an 85, right? Because people are
Okay.
gonna riot if you give like an 80. Oh my gosh, it's almost a 79.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really hard to break that mindset of like, every single like point on this 100-point scale, is gonna matter. I wanted to take a second and say like, okay, we talked about like this easy, medium, and hard stuff. So
Mhm.
like we did it based on like if you're able
I've,
to get all of the easy points and all of the medium points, right, you are proficient. If you're able to get like some of the hard points, then maybe like you're mastered. And if you're able to get more than half of the hard points available, right, then you are advanced. So like it's not like totally just arbitrary, like I'm gonna pick and choose like what bucket you're in. Like it is
right.
based on the number of points that are earned, but I guess the cut scores is going to be different for each assignment just based on how many questions ended up being easy, medium, or hard.
And then we translated those to put that into a grade book to be within the standard, traditional grade book system. But what was nice is that we didn't put in an 87 and an 86 and an 82. We put in either 100, 85, 65, whatever it was. Those were the only grades that we put in. And yes, the grade book has to average. You get a final, grade at the end of the semester. So in the interest of time, though, let's talk about that final grade at the end of the semester. How well did the system that you use in class now and that we developed, a few years ago, how well did it predict the score on an AP test?
It was good. My district sent me like a report of, final class averages and AP scores. I actually got like anonymized results for, I think, like every AP Physics 1 teacher in the district, every AP Physics C teacher in the district, because those are the two courses that I teach. So to put this in perspective, right? I've got those 3 buckets, easy, medium, and hard. Pretty much our cuts are, less than half the easy. You are emerging, right? Which is our lowest category, which we do have like a low floor. It's a 50, right? So this is like to keep kids like engaged and like, oh my gosh, I made a 0. I can like never recover from it, right?
Right.
Emerging is going to be a 50 if you end up, with that as like your final assessment of learning score after like all assessments are said and done, right? It's not a total deal breaker. It's tough, right? But it's recoverable. My 95s and above pretty much universally made 5s, right? So
Nice.
it's a little high, right? My 90s and aboves, they were kind of like the 4s and the 5s, right? Everyone in my 80 bucket was with the 3s, which aligns
Yeah.
really well with what we had set our like these proficiency levels being. So emerging, developing, proficient, mastered, and advanced. Literally, we tried to correlate these with our like projected AP scores, and they've been going really well. So I've been pleased with that.
Nice. Yeah. So the idea isn't, just college boards, just random like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, although they've been doing it for a long time. This really is rooted in the idea of okay, we as humans can't really precisely narrow down proficiency to 100, degrees of separation. We really can only handle 4 or 5 buckets, and we can routinely delineate a student into which bucket they're supposed to be in fairly well, especially with the teacher training that we have. All right, so we are out of time. If listeners want to learn more about this topic on grading philosophies or grading challenges in general, or how Frisco is redefining their grading policies, where could they find that online?
Well, I'm sure that the Frisco website has a lot, but I will say one of the books that's been like really influential in our like grading philosophy is Grading from the Inside Out by Tom Schimmer. I'm also a really big fan of Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics.
Yep.
Both of these books talk a lot about how you can leverage your most recent and like your most frequent scores in determining right a student's like final grade and giving them a really good understanding of like where they are and like how they're doing in the class.
Nice. And that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Christine, for being a guest today. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.